one thing, as I talk to a lot of people who want to be startup founders or want to take that risk, YouTube also been one of those areas. You never know whether you'll be successful or not. We are talking about the 0.01% who
Yeah,
is making that million, as you talked
yeah.
about. Um, so there is this risk reward ratio. So you get a reward based on how much risk you are taking. So like Elon Musk is taking a risk on his whole money to put it into XYZ company, trying to solve a bigger problem, has a bigger leverage to get to that bigger. What's your view on risk? Because I think a lot of times as we grew up in India, not sure about you, but we have a tendency of not taking risk. I mean, risk is almost no for everyone.
Mm.
So over the years, how what's your view has been on risk now that you're doing a startup which is completely risky to the highest risk that someone can take? Um, what's your view on risk?
See, I think I sort of look at it from two lenses. One, I think risk has to be apportioned over a time period, right? I think if you look at, as for me, could I be making $500,000 in salary today versus what I'm doing right now? Um, it would never make sense. It's just too risky. In fact, when I did my startup, of the five people I consulted, actually three said don't do it. It was in the middle of the pandemic, actually, right? But the two
Mhm.
people who said yes were actually existing entrepreneurs, right? And maybe there was a confirmation bias in my head, but that worked. But I think so. If you are always going to evaluate $500,000 of salary to giving up that money and having to build a startup, you will never be able to do
Mhm.
it. But very frankly, the way I contextualize it is I said, okay, let me look at a 10-year period. Even if I were to make $500,000, I'm talking about $5 million of gross income over the next 10 years, right? And therefore, can I build a business, even if I'm purely doing it from a financial reason? My reasons were very different.
Yeah.
Can I build an
Mm-hmm.
enterprise that gives me better ROI than $5 million, right? Um, and that's the bet you're taking. That's the risk you're taking, right? In the scheme of things, if you give this 2 years of your prime time, it's okay, so that's sort of the
Mm-hmm.
time lens is very critical, that your profession, your career is not a 2 year
Mm-hmm.
play, it's a 30, 40 year play, right? And
Yes.
it's the things you don't do that you regret later, right? I mean, Jeff Bezos would say, basically, right?
Yeah, just pays us
So
off.
so, so that, I think, was the one parameter, right? The second axis I look at for risk is, it doesn't matter how good or bad an idea it is. This Tam Sam Som business and the relevance of that business. That's all bullshit in my, like,
Mm-hmm.
I deal with a lot of conversations where the question is scalability. I'm like, forget that, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't really matter. So when I'm looking at risk, I'm thinking about, am I applying the right framework to think about this?
Mm-hmm.
Am I doing this deeply out of passion? Am I deeply doing this deeply because I see this as a problem? Is this an
Mm-hmm.
interest area? And when I'm able to calibrate that, right, I'm able to apply a risk weightage to it. If I'm doing something out of interest, my input and risk has to be weighted to that, right? If I'm doing something purely for financial reasons, then you've got to apply a but people tend to take a very broad classification of risk and say everything is risky, basically, right?
Everything is risky.
Um, and I think, you basically don't think about, what you're going to lose in the process. I think it's about what you will gain in the process. And I think there is very little filling up of that side, right? I mean, when I also started my business, looked at 10 nodes of failure, but I never draw
Mm-hmm.
like 5 nodes of success, because when you're
Mm-hmm.
starting out, you're more likely to fail than succeed, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think it basically sort of comes down to a couple of those things, but I think it's really sort of, people look at time. That time, I feel, is,
Mm-hmm.
are you apportioning the risk over the right time metrics or not, is the key thing.